Welcome to the Charles Cormier podcast. We have Michael L. Littman with us today. Michael is a legend, he's a computer scientist, a researcher, an educator, and author. His research interest focuses mostly on reinforcement learning. So, currently a university professor of computer science at Brown University. He's been teaching there for almost, more than a decade now. So, quite impressive. Michael, I'm glad to have you on. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. Yeah, actually, I mean, the interesting thing from my perspective is I'm actually just getting back to Brown. This is the first day of my second week back at the university. I spent the last 3 years working in the federal government on AI funding, and so trying to help keep academics funded to do artificial intelligence research. And it just so happened that I was there. I mean, if you take the current date and subtract 3 years from it, you'll realize that it was just before the Chat GPT moment that I came to the federal government, and so that really changed the nature of my job quite a bit. Instead of just being focused on AI research with respect to my team, we suddenly became an AI resource for the entire agency and in some ways the whole federal government. So there was just a lot going on, a lot of people interested in AI, a lot of decisions that were being made, and so it was a very exciting time to be in DC.
And what changed since the ChatGPT moment? Do you feel that academia can still compete against the research of big companies like OpenAI?
I mean, I don't think it's a competition. I don't think it's ever been a competition. If you look at the history of AI research, and this is probably true of other fields as well, but I'm an AI researcher, so that's what I know the best, is that there have been complementary efforts happening in industry and academia forever. So the whole history of the field, and this is one of those moments as well that it is definitely the case that industry is bringing these general purpose chatbots to a mass audience. And if the competition was simply who's got the best or the biggest chatbot, academia would really have very little role to play in that. There's still things I think that academics are really good at that, and companies are finding ways of bringing them to bear. But no, I think the important thing for academics to be focused in on is the deeper issues. Like, what's actually happening? How do these systems work? How could we build them better if we were going to start from scratch? I think companies are very much stuck in a local minimum, right? So they're able to make these systems extremely effectively with the tools that they have, but nobody has any incentive to really rethink the whole pipeline. They're just patching it. They're just adding layers of training to it and trying to make them better, which is fantastic. But that's not. I don't think this is the end game. Like, I don't think we're about to be done. I think that there's a lot more of the space to explore.
And isn't OpenAI, for example, investing in research, aka like alternative ways to LLMs? For example, aren't they like investing into actual research without like a monetary goal?
I don't know. I can't speak to it. They're somewhat closed, so it's hard to tell exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. But it is, again, it's always been the case that there industries participating in the blue sky academic research, and they tend to wax and wane, like what their contributions are and what they're able to do to really help move the conversation forward often varies very much by whether or not that particular company is in a kind of monopoly situation. So back in the old days, when Bell Labs was funded by a tax on all U.S. phone service, just a tiny little tax, but it all adds up when you're talking about a whole country. They were doing some of the best academic research that was around. They became competitive around the time that I joined. I was a member of that team. And once they were in a competitive industry, they stopped. They really pulled back substantially in terms of their ability to contribute to fundamental questions, and it was really left to academics to continue to move that forward. And I think that's what we're seeing here today. Is that DeepMind, I think, was really ahead of the curve in many ways, and they've supplied some really great ideas into the academic conversation. Google, which is, I guess they've more or less merged at this point, but Google has made some nice contributions. OpenAI has made some contributions, but now that they're in a very competitive atmosphere, I think we're going to see less and less of that. And it's going to fall to the academics to keep focused on these longer timescale questions.
Right, and you mentioned that OpenAI was quite closed source. Isn't academia the same way? Don't they depend on some funds and some proprietary data to actually scale and stay alive?
I don't know what you're referring to. I mean, it is absolutely the case that the whole structure of academic research is founded on a kind of openness. But of course, there is competition happening as well, and so openness is not. It's not like every single person tells every other single person every thought that flits through their head. There's some amount of sort of creative concealment. But no, I think it's absolutely the case that academics are trying to find ways to study the process, right? They're not making their dollars by having a piece of technology that no one else has. They're trying to earn their keep by generating really good ideas that can be shared widely.
And what is the balance with what you can share, what you cannot share? What if that gets in the hands of a bad actor, or just a competing lab just steals everything that you did? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is a consistent concern in the academic world. It's generally been the case that much of the research that's happening in academic labs is so-called pre-competitive, and I think there's not a lot of concern about the way that those results can be used. I mean, okay, I don't want to say it that way because that sounds terrible. It's not the case that people aren't worried about people taking their ideas and doing bad things with them, but the calculus is that it's better to have these ideas out in the public domain than it is um, to try to be protective. Now, there are parts of the research world, for example, in bioweapons and certain parts of um infectious disease, where it's considered that what's happening there is so clearly possible that it opens the door for dangerous behavior so much that in fact the research projects themselves need to be watched very, very carefully. And so there are mechanisms in place, especially amongst funders, to say, okay, we're giving you these funding dollars, but we have to make sure that what you're doing is going to stay on the safe side of things. That has not yet happened in the AI world yet, but I think there's a lot of folks who believe that the stuff that we're doing in AI is just as dangerous, if not more so. It's just that I don't think that any of these rules have actually kicked in yet.
Right. What are your thoughts on researchers like Joshua Bengio starting Law Zero to actually codify AI ethics?
Well, I mean, I think it's great that people are talking about AI ethics. I think Benjo has made tremendous contributions to the field. I don't. I have no problem with that. I do think he's leaned into alarmism a little bit, which I feel like is not necessarily healthy. But he's more grounded and sane than some other folks who I think are having similar thoughts. So I'm my hope is that he will hold it together and he will continue to generate really good ideas.
Right. And when I started by saying that academia is competing with business, I mean that Zuck has been trying to poach OpenAI researchers for $100 million. Do you feel that AGI could scale capitalism to very much its limits? And when it does so, what could happen to the world? Do you think that capitalism is a thing that can forever scale?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So it has definitely always been the case that in computer science, which is the field that I'm in, that there's a tension between. It's like sufficiently practical that there's a tension, and we don't have like whether or not the best people end up being on the academic side or they end up being on the industry side, or they go back and forth, or they do both at the same time. That's been an evolving situation for many, many years. Way pre, I don't want to say pre AI because AI was happening, but pre this kind of AI moment that we're in. That being said, I do think that this poaching that we're seeing between Meta and OpenAI is a bit on the unprecedented side. I have there's a former student who worked with me, I think on his master's degree, but also as an undergrad, a fellow by the name of Noam Shazir, who went off and worked at Google and was one of the co-authors of the Transformer paper. And ultimately, well, not ultimately, he did leave. He left Google, founded a company called Character.ai, and then Google bought that company back just so that they could have access to Noam's expertise to the tune of something like $2.4 billion or something like that. The numbers that we're talking about now are just in a whole other category that we've never really dealt with before. I don't think this is sustainable for anyone. And I think it's in some ways a little bit like professional sports in that there's some very, very big ticket people, but it's not, but it falls off really, really quickly, right? It is the case that my salary is not in that particular range at the moment. And I think that the contributions I'm making to AI are lovely. But at the same time, there's a couple superstars who are making, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 digits. And then, but then there's the rest of the long flat part of the curve. And I think it makes for splashy news, but I don't think it's completely changing the landscape.
But arguably, you are a superstar. You must have received like these pretty ludicrous offers, right? Like, what has prompted you to actually stay and not accept $7 million paycheck on a yearly basis?
So I have not received such an offer. It's true that I just moved from Virginia to
your
Rhode Island.
headhunter. I'll plug you in OpenAI, and I'll take like 2 to 3%, something like that.
You would deserve that for sure. I was pointing out that I just moved from Virginia to Rhode Island, and so I haven't checked all my mail yet. So it's possible that some very, very large offer is waiting, but I don't think so. I think what they're really focusing in on for these really, really big ticket folks are people who know how to build giant models, right? Because that's a kind of expertise, and it's not well distributed in the academic world either. There's a handful of people in academia who have some experience with that, but really building one of these things requires a giant team and giant resources. And you're right, this is not mainly what academic researchers focus on. We're trying to build projects that can educate our students and get them to the point where they can be independent thinkers and independent researchers. And we're not really competing in that particular arena. But no, super interesting.
Giant models, do you think that will scale or that will stop? And is it like as many data centers as possible, like burning the planet in the process?
Right, that is a big concern that a lot of people have. That the way that industry is scaling this stuff up is by turning as much of the planet as possible into energy consumption centers. Right. I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think that's where things are going to end up leveling off. I think it's going to be the case that we probably do spend more in energy on AI and in computing than we have in the past. But the numbers that we're seeing now are really, really scary, actually, because they're not sustainable. So no, I think burning up the planet is nobody's idea of a good time. I do think that companies right now are just in this really weird competitive space where they have to prove that they're the ones that everybody should go to, and they can't let their guard down. They have to invest, because if you're second place or third place in this, it's possible that you don't count anymore.
Right. But they are creating greener data centers. That's been proven. And also my question revolves more around, do you think that this current approach with just like crunching more and more data, do you think that will lead to a super intelligence that could solve most of humanity's problem?
I really don't. I think it's kind of silly in a lot of different ways. I just had a really nice meeting with somebody who is a historian of science. And he was talking about how there was a theory of human science that went something like, well, the purpose of science is to be able to predict everything that could be predicted as accurately as possible. But then another historian came along and said, no, you're misreading it. It's actually being able to intervene in the world and accomplish anything that you want to accomplish. And maybe prediction is helpful for that, but prediction is not an end unto itself. I think that's sort of what we're seeing with a lot of these AI systems, that they're building these systems that start off, right? The majority of their training is focused on predicting next words, right? It's a prediction problem. It's not an intervention problem. It's not an acting problem. My research area is reinforcement learning. We've always centered the discussion around how do you make systems that actually do things? They actually intervene in the world. They're not just trying to make predictions, because we know that simply making a prediction that you never act on doesn't give you information for how to act. You have to actually act and see the repercussions to be able to build a system that is able to make decisions that are fruitful, that are wise. And so, yeah, I definitely am of the opinion that this methodology of like, let's just take more and more static data, more text written by human beings, and feed it into the system and see, see it become the accumulation of all human knowledge. I don't think that's how human knowledge works. I don't think that we learn to be what we are just by consuming. We learn to be what we are by interacting with the world, and I think we need a different paradigm if we're going to expect to see systems that are more capable than what we see today. The systems today are very capable. I grant that, but they're weird quirks. Their shortcomings, to me, all come down to the fact that they don't actually act in the world and observe the repercussions of their decisions.
And aren't we about to hit the agentic age? And yeah, OpenAI, the operator was quite limited. What is the missing piece for OpenAI to introduce the world to the agentic age fully? What is the technical problem here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things to say about that. One is that lots of people are using the word agentic to mean probably 4 or 5 different things. The field that I come from is adjacent to another field in AI that's called agents or multi-agent systems. And that community has focused for a really, really long time on what happens when you have lots of intelligent or nearly intelligent agents that are interacting together and trying to solve problems. What goes wrong? How can you control these systems? How can you dictate what it is that you want them to accomplish? And I feel like the modern LLM-based AI community is kind of rediscovering, sometimes poorly, some of the lessons that are already well known in that field. So I'm all in favor of agentic systems. I think one of the reasons that one of the technical barriers to just taking an LLM and just saying you're an agent now is that they're not trained to behave. They're not trained to act. They're trained to mimic the language that they were exposed to. And you can learn, obviously, it turns out you can learn a tremendous amount from that, but you don't really learn how to make subtle decisions, right? You don't really learn to reflect on the repercussions of your actions. And I think without taking, I want to say, reinforcement learning more seriously as a central concern in how these systems are built, we're just going to be stuck. We're going to be stuck with these kind of like ghost agents, right? That are just they're just playing out their scripts, but they're not really understanding what they need to do differently to change the outcomes.
And is it the best way to try to reproduce how her human brain works? Because this alien intelligence is equally fascinating. There's probably 1,000 paths or 1,000,000 paths to creating intelligence. What do you have to say on the approach of trying to reproduce her brain vs not?
Yeah, so I sometimes call myself a cognitive science groupie. Like, I like to go to cognitive science talks and hear about how people are studying the human mind. I do find the human mind extremely interesting. I think part of what makes computer science so interesting to me is because it is a kind of like mind-like thing that we can actually understand and control. So I do think there's a ton that we can learn from the way that human beings get around in the world and the things that we do, the things that we never do. That being said, I'm not of the opinion that, hey, what we need to do is map out all the neuronal connections in the human brain and then just implement them, and then we'll have a brain. I think that's the wrong level. I think we're seeing some of that really with respect to other areas of science, not just neuroscience, but weather prediction and certain topics in physics, and, well, for that matter, protein structure prediction, right? Where for the longest time, what the community has been doing is saying, hey, we understand the physical process here. We just have to simulate them in sufficient detail, and then we'll have the answers, right? We'll know how protein folds because we'll actually simulate protein doing the whole folding operation, and we know the laws of physics. We'll just simulate them. Well, it turns out that's an extremely inefficient way of getting to the answer. And at the end of the day, you've wasted a ton of resources, and it doesn't work particularly well. What we're finding with in these modern AI systems is that they can often predict what the answer is going to be without having to go through all those intermediate physical steps. And I think there's a tremendous power to that. And I think we can do the same thing on the intelligence side. We don't have to simulate all the individual neurons and how they fire to get some of the same results.
So how do you simulate action? Let's take a child, for example. They're walking, they're trying things. Their parents are like, no, don't do this. Please do this. And they obviously have their own system, their serotonin system. You eat food, you feel good. You walk, then you can get to that object faster? How do you actually simulate that true agentic mode in computers?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And actually, kid walking has been a very inspiring topic for me in my career. I have a collection of babies crawling, because it turns out, I mean, we think about crawling, it's that the thing that babies do where their legs go sort of in diagonal, like they cross from each other. But not all babies discover that. I think learning how to crawl is a fundamentally creative act. And some babies come up with other ways of doing it. So I have in my collection a kid who sits and then scooches, kind of puts hands between, the video is not great for this, but hands between the legs and on the side, and then pulls forward, and then adjusts the hands and pulls forward, almost like rowing
like a zombie.
I wouldn't say a zombie, not because these are people who are willing to share their videos of their children with me. So they're a lot of family friends. So no zombies. They're all brilliant, beautiful. The children are our future. We have all our hope in them. But they do some really wacky things when it comes to crawling. And so, so how does that work? How do kids, if you're not built to crawl? I think we're built to walk. I think human beings, actually, a lot of our physiology is designed around the idea that we're going to be walking. But crawling is sort of at this intermediate stage that I don't think is built in. And so how do kids come to do it? And the answer is, well, I don't know the answer, but my perception of the answer is, first of all the videos that I've collected, the kids are not just crawling to get around. They're going to something. There's like a ball or a toy or a bit of food or a parent or something, and they're trying to get someplace. And so there's this motivation system that is built into us. Reinforcement learning, we call them reward functions, but in actual neurobiology, we call them motivational systems that want things. They actually want us to do things, and they urge us to do them, and they basically leave it up to us to figure out how to get the job done, right? So if the job is to be where the toy is, that's the goal. The goal isn't to twitch your muscles in this particular way. The muscle twitching is just done so that the goal is accomplished. And I think figuring out what the right kinds of reward systems, the right kind of motivations are, really is a very powerful way of creating systems that are very competent.
And how do you do that in bots? Because they're not hard coded by nature, right? We have DNA on our side. They would have potential parents, which is us, and they would have almost infinite memory, way faster speed, potentially faster learning. If you take the chest AI, I think it was called Deep Blue or something like that, or the AlphaGo, for example, it was like a very specific goal, right? So do we actually, so like that was one question. And the second one would be, do we actually need these AIs to have a physical body, arms and legs, to become sentient?
Those are very good questions. I do not know the answers to these questions. As you pointed out, for things like board games, there is this well-defined notion of a goal, and we can program that in, and it's really not a big deal. And that has helped create these game playing programs that are actually quite capable, right? They're at the level of the top human beings who've ever played these games, sometimes beyond. So that's super interesting. For things like being a person or being intelligent and getting around in the world, it is very hard to define, well, what is that reward function, and how can the agent compute it internally, right? Because it's not enough to just be able to say, oh, well, that was a good move, that was a bad move. You have to be able to, the system itself has to be able to do that evaluation so that it can continue to drive its behavior. We have very few sort of task environments that we know how to do that for. So that's very much a big research question, I think, at this point. As far as whether you need a body to be sentient is concerned, in principle, I think the answer is no. I don't think you need a body. I think you need to be able to interact with an environment, and that could be done purely textually, potentially, though it's that's not the best communications channel with the outside world. So I do think it's tough. I think bodies are really helpful, and I think we probably want to have more AI systems that are being embodied and they're being trained to actually interact with the world as it exists. But no, I don't think in principle, philosophically, you need a body to be sentient.
And you're quite fluent in the game theory of things. Does game theory comes in as a second nature to current LLMs? Is it something that was taught to them, and how can that be part of the agentic revolution that we're seeing right now?
Right. One thing okay, so just to unpack what you said a little bit, because I think there's a lot of really good ideas there and might not be obvious to all of our listeners. First of all, it is the case that the agents research community, like the people who were studying agents before LLMs became a thing, they've adopted game theory as one of their central organizing principles, right? It's an idea that's actually being used to think about how those systems are built and how to normatively potentially create them to solve problems. Why is that? Well, what is game theory? Game theory is the idea that you've got separate individuals that have their own, potentially their own motivations, their own goals, their own rewards, but they are separate in terms of making a decision and then seeing the impact on themselves. And so game theory is very relevant to this notion of, well, we're going to build a bunch of these bots and we're going to set them loose and they're going to interact with each other, because that whole notion of intelligent agents interacting with each other, intelligent programs interacting with each other, is very central to this sort of agent conceptualization of the world. So I think the more that we talk about, well, we're going to want to build AI systems that, well, for example, there was an experiment done, I think Anthropic was doing this, or maybe they were using Anthropic's bot and it was a separate organization, but they were looking specifically at, hey, could we use one of these LLMs to run a store, to actually like make decisions about pricing and ordering a new thing? It was a vending machine, but it was like actually connected to a chatbot, and the chatbot was tasked with making decisions about allocating resources. And it was terrible. It was really remarkably terrible. The people using the system were able to convince it to start stocking tungsten cubes, because why not? And the system outlaid a lot of money to actually get a hold of these cubes, and then couldn't really sell them, so kept reducing the price. Like, it wasn't really reasoning very rationally. And I don't think it comes naturally to these systems to do so, because it's this notion of really thinking about, all right, what can I do? How will this other agent that maybe has different goals respond to that? How will that undermine or support the goals that I have? And that kind of, I need to think about you thinking about me thinking about you, is a very sophisticated process in human beings that didn't just spontaneously appear in the chatbots. Like, they're good at theory of mind. They can articulate stories about what's happening in the mind of another, but they were never asked to do anything with that information. So again, they were caught, able to predict, able to describe, but not able to do. And I think that you have to start. In the article that I read about this Anthropic bot running a vending machine, they're like, oh, but this should be really easy to fix, because all we have to do is explain to them how like stores work. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, you're so wrong. This is the entire field of intelligent agents that has been working for decades. Yes, you can make use of what's known in that field, but it's not simple and it's not easy. You're oversimplifying it.
Right. And should it be hard coded into these systems that they would need to go win-win? And when would be a scenario in which it would be fine to give the other party 0 tokens while you take it all? Is it if you're dealing with a bad person, the person that needs to be penalized? Tell me a bit more about that.
No, that's super interesting. So do we have to instill into these bots kind of an economic imperative, right? To have them really understand the notion of exchange of goods and services and money. I don't know. I've worked in this field. I've created bots that can discover some of these things on their own, but it's really computationally heavy. And so what's interesting is, how would you actually inspire an agent to engage in economic activities like this without being overly prescriptive, right? If you're too prescriptive and say, well, this is how things work, and then things start to deviate from that in some way, then the bot is ill-prepared. It's not going to be able to deal with the changes. So we have to instill into the bots a notion of, like, a higher level notion of what it means to get along, and what it means to lose resources, and what it means to gain resources, and how others react to that. But I think it needs to be done at a pretty high level. I don't think we should be scripting all of that.
And what do you think of talking about AI ethics, right? I'm listening to this book, Empire of AI, and I find it so bad because there's a lot of opinions in there, and there's a lot of quote unquote woke stuff. That the author of the book, Karen Howe, she's quite describing things as they should be and not how they are. And I think that's extremely dangerous. If you're not describing reality as it is, you're just confusing the AI. It's fine to inject a little bit of progress into it and tell it, yeah, that's what we're aiming for eventually. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel that's actually unscientific to do that, to tell an AI how things should be vs how they are?
That's a really great question. I haven't read this book. I've met Karen Howe. She seems thoughtful, reasonable, and well informed. So I have a I try to give her the benefit of the doubt. But it is right. So this notion of should we be prescriptive to the bots, and is there a really well defined notion of what the sort of normatively correct behavior is? No, I think humankind has been debating these kinds of questions for thousands of years. So yeah, I think it's for anybody to stand up, any tech person or any journalist to stand up and say, "Oh no, there's obviously a right answer here, and we just have to implement it." That seems false to me.
Right. I think it's very important that we bring society in some way, but I think it's also important that we say, okay, here's how things are in this reality, because else the agent will just go in one random direction, and I think it skews the full data and makes it pretty unscientific. I want to talk about like as well the partially observable Markov decision process. Tell me a bit more about that. It's the first time I lay my eyes on that theory of things, but it's interesting. Tell us a bit more about that one and how it relates to what you do.
Sure thing. So the fundamental model that's kind of unified the field of reinforcement learning these years is called the Markov decision process, and it's basically a thing that says a decision maker, is in one of a set of possible states. Each action that it chooses at each moment in time causes it to transition from state to state to state. And maybe some states have a high reward associated with them. And so it's a really natural model of things like navigation, like you want a mouse to get to the cheese in a maze. And so each place in the maze is a state, and each decision about which corridor to go down to is an action. And then the cheese is a reward. So it's a nice model. It's a useful model, but it has a bunch of shortcomings. One is it doesn't admit that there can be any other agents, and so it was really important for the field to bring game theory into it. But another dimension that's actually really important is the notion that you don't know exactly what state you're in sometimes, right? So I can see you, and I can see through the camera. I can see some stuff behind me, but there could be somebody or something lurking behind me that could poke me or stab me or something. And I need to deal with that. I need to live in this world not knowing a lot about the things around me. And so a partially observable Markov decision process, set true, as it's formally defined using a 7-tuple, according to the screen in front of me right now. It consists of, again, like in a Markov decision process, states, actions, transitions, and rewards. But in addition, there's a notion of observation. So when you're in a state, you get some information about the being in that state, but you may not get complete information. You may not know the state that you're in. You just have these clues. And so this was a really useful model for folks in the field to be thinking about, because, well, from a practical standpoint, if we're building robots or chatbots or anything that's actually agentic and moving around in physical or social space, it needs to be able to reason about things that it doesn't have direct visibility on. So is there something behind that door? I don't know. Maybe I should open the door to find out. In a Markov decision process, that's not even a choice, because I know what state I'm in. And so I know if there's something behind the door. So I'd never have to open it. I'd never have to take an action to gain information, right? All the information in some sense is already in me. And so much of what we do as human beings in the world, and animals do as creatures in the world, and that bots need to do when they're interacting with the real world, is reason about this incomplete information that they have about what's happening right now. And so that's the idea of what my advisor ended up calling a POMDP, a partially observable Markov decision process, because it defines what the problem is. What am I trying to do in a world where I don't have complete knowledge about my current state?
Very interesting. I want to finish up with a couple of rapid fires that I sort of forgot to ask, but you've been through a couple of AI winters. Do you feel that Zuck offering like $100 million packages, do you think that could hamper the industry and actually cause a winter?
Sure. I mean, any kind of ungrounded overinvestment in a field is I mean, but what is an AI winter? AI winters, in some sense, were moments in history where the bubble popped, right? So there was lots of overpromising, there was lots of investment, and then the people who were doing that investment decided, hey, this isn't actually doing what I was promised it would do, and then they uninvest, and they sometimes will I mean, investors being who they are, they will sometimes overinvest when things look good and then underinvest if the perception is that things aren't good. And these winters are when massive underinvestment took place. So yeah, so from that perspective, I think this notion of, oh, we're going to pay people, $1 skillion, and like now Zuck and his shareholders are on the line. I never called him Zuck before, but anyway, Mark Zuckerberg and his shareholders are now basically on the hook. If this team that they put together at great expense doesn't actually end up producing anything like what they're promising to do, there's probably going to be a swing of underinvestment. Now, one of the things that feels different this time compared to the other winters that I don't think I caused any of them, but I do think that I got a front row seat at one and a maybe back row seat at the other. One of the things that was true is that there was much talk in principle about what these systems could do. And they really weren't up to the task. And so the fact that there was a withdrawal of investment was somewhat justified, right? I think the promise was still there, but it wasn't ready. It wasn't actually paying off. This round, we are seeing some payoffs, right? We are definitely seeing systems that are out in the world. They're definitely changing the way that people do certain real things, right? It's not just folks doing lab experiments and promising, hey, wouldn't this be amazing if we scaled it up? I mean, it's been scaled up. I think that we're still seeing massive overpromising, but I don't think it's all vaporware. I think some of it is real. And so from that perspective, we'll probably see a retraction, like a chilling, like a winter is coming sort of thing. But I don't think we're going to get all the way to a deep freeze, because I think that it's just been too useful to too many people. So yeah, we'll see a downturn, but I don't think we're going to see complete collapse.
And to prevent the winter that would be created by LLMs not scaling, how should one determine their research thesis? Is it like 80% LLM, 20% on the wild innovative side? How do you go with that?
Well, I mean, I think it's at the level of the field that you want to think about that portfolio. I don't think individual researchers need to try to divide up their work in a very fine-grained way. I think a lot of people who end up going into research are very single-minded people, right? They're the kind of people that you might not want to talk to them about all possible topics, but the topic that they are the expert in, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that there's that person knowing that topic, right? And so I think that some individuals are going to, and we see it already, there's some folks who are just letting this LLM thing go by. Like they're just not buying in, and they're just sticking with the research that they do. There's some people who've gone completely whole hog on LLMs, and not just LLMs, but can we understand these things, right? Can we actually make sense of how they compute what they compute, which I think is a fantastic scientific question. But there's a huge pile of people in the middle that have basically not given up on the fundamental problem that they're interested in is still the problem that they're interested in, but they need to know, can LLMs help solve that problem, right? Is it the case that this isn't a problem anymore because LLMs solve it? Or is it sort of an illusion that they seem to solve it, but they really don't, and we need to keep digging? Maybe there's insights from LLMs that can help solve it, but it's not solved yet. And I think that's what we're seeing in most of the research field, is that folks are really interested in questions like, how do you study kind of long-term planning? Well, LLMs can help with that, but they don't make the problem go away, right? If LLMs are the answer, then that was never the question that we thought we were asking is not the question we were asking. And it's really interesting seeing my colleagues. Like, I see different pockets of people that study different topics, but they're all going through a very similar process of, wait, does this actually solve my problem? The only field where oh yeah, it absolutely solves their problem are natural language processing people, right? The folks that were actually trying to figure out, how do I make a program that can decide if this is a noun or a verb in this context? That problem is it's so solved so much further, more deeply than they had ever anticipated it would be, that anybody working on that now is kind of ignoring reality. But other fields, there really is so much still to do.
And in the best students that you've seen, the best researchers, what would be the top skills you would be looking into? Because OpenAI, arguably, why they've gone that high so fast was because they reunited the best researchers in the world, right? That's still the dominant thesis. How do you actually do that?
Yeah, that's great. Well, on the academic side, one of the things that we're seeing is that for students to be able to have a real impact and get their papers published and get their ideas out there, they have to be pretty good engineers. And that was just not the case when I was a PhD student. Actually, this is maybe not a great example, but I actually stopped making programs. Like, I did for my published research, I did a lot of programs, but for my dissertation, I didn't really do anything. I didn't write any code. I just proved theorems, right? It was very mathematical. It is the case now that if you want your work to get noticed, you have to do it kind of at scale. And that generally involves learning the skills on how to wrangle an entire compute cluster, right? And get it to do what you're trying to get it to do. How many GPUs can you tether together to solve this kind of problem? So it really is a different space now to get attention. For your academic ideas, you need to be able to build a pretty sophisticated piece of software.
You also need to understand the hardware part and play with these GPUs yourself.
And that's a good question. I think that there's benefits to that, but I think plenty of people are making research contributions staying at a pretty high level, right? You can use software packages. You have to know you have to be able to speak about the hardware. You have to know that, wait, I have this part I should run on the GPUs. This part I should not run on the GPUs. But there's things like what DeepSeek did, where they actually got into the nitty-gritty of how big is the cache that moves between this part of the processor and this part of the processor, and let's optimize the hell out of that. No, most of our PhD students are not in a position to really contribute at that level. But the fact that some people do, and then they make a library, and then you can build stuff on the library, make it so that it's potentially not necessary.
What do you have to say on the NVIDIA gold rush? What happened there, and are we really limited by the strength of our chips? There was the DeepSeek moment, right? What do you have to say in between the progress, the speed of progress vs the hardware or the software part?
Yeah, no, I mean, the hardware has actually has obviously played a really, really big role in getting us to where we are now. I think the whole deep learning thing was already in the research literature for, I don't know if it was a decade, but it was for a while. People were talking about these ideas, but it wasn't until
DeepSeek.
No, before DeepSeek. No, Hinton's group. I'm talking about like 2012 or so. They showed that you could actually run some of these processes on a GPU, and it was a really good fit. And they could run, overnight, a thing that would have basically been impossible to ever do. That really opened people's eyes. So hardware has played a really important role in getting us to where we are now. I don't think that's where all the innovation is happening. I think to the extent that NVIDIA's got a really nice chip, and it does seem to be kind of the industry standard. I would love it if I don't think NVIDIA would like this, but I think if it were the case that this became a commodity and there were other companies making more or less the same processors, or at least processors that could run the same kind of workloads, that would be great for the field. It would just be bad for NVIDIA.
And talking about DeepSeek here, when we started, you mentioned that there's no such thing as competition. I know that's not exactly what you meant. There's always a degree of competition, but is there really an AI arms race? Because that seems to be the underlying argument, right? Behind Stargate, for example, and all that funding that's going in. It's like, oh, let's reach it before China does. Is there really such a thing? What is your opinion on that?
I mean, there's clearly a race dynamic at work, right? There was a moment when I don't know, every month a company was saying, no, our model's bigger. And like, and then the next month, no, it's a different company. Our model's bigger. And that seemed like a really,
Game
it felt
theory,
very, what's that?
very game theory ish.
It did feel game theory-ish. It really did feel game theory-ish. I had read a book in like 2016 or so called Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, and he talked about this kind of arms race that would happen in the build up to superintelligence. And I was like, that's stupid. That would never happen. But of course, something like that absolutely happened because people, right? It wasn't the technology. It was the fact that the companies felt like if they weren't the one that had the spotlight, they were going to wither and die. And they felt it was an existential threat to them as corporations to get the next, I don't know, the next big fancy model out the door. And it's always the case in academia that we're always racing against each other. We're always trying to have a bigger idea than our colleagues as soon as possible. And we talk about getting scooped, right? Sometimes where you're working on a project and then somebody publishes something that's basically the same as what you were shooting for. And that's a really frustrating thing. But in academia, it's good somewhat because it's this race is what keeps us moving forward. In the companies, like to the extent that it's being done well, sure, it should be done in a way that helps move the offerings of the companies forward. That's a good thing. But if it makes them take their eye off of other important things because they're just laser focused on this one aspect, I don't think that's great for consumers. I don't think that's great for the companies long term. And so I think that's an unfortunate kind of dynamic.
Interesting. As a guy that does create simulations on the computers, do you believe that we're into one?
I do not. And the more I read about that stuff, the more it seems sort of crazy. If we are in a simulation, then the world that we're simulated in looks nothing at all like the world that we're actually in. And we have no access to that. We have no idea what the physics would even be there. The idea that and I've heard philosophers talk about it, I've heard Bostrom talk about this, the idea that there's a world that's populated by people just like us, or like in the Matrix, like they're just regular people, but then that we're simulated as regular people, and we don't know whether we're the real people or they're the real people. Like, what a waste of simulation. Why would we simulate that world? We should be simulating other interesting worlds that have properties very different from the world that we're actually in. That's the kinds of simulations I write. I don't simulate myself getting out of bed in the morning. That's mundane. Like I simulate like what happens at the core of a star. Like if you're going to simulate something, you should make it interesting. So I think the idea that we can't tell whether we're simulated us or real us, and maybe we could break out of the simulation, like that's just weird.
And what are some of your wildest ideas or wildest thoughts that you had nowadays as a researcher?
I mean, I try not to think of them as being wild, but I have started to question, like most of my career, I've been really interested in solving the AI problem, which I guess would be now, the terminology now would be creating artificial general intelligence. And I'm now not sure that I think I still think it's really interesting intellectually, but I don't know that it's necessarily a good thing for the world. Like if we have people, like we don't need to mass produce people. Like we already have the machinery to mass produce people. We've created billions of them. Why do we want to make artificial people when we have actual people? I think it's super, like it answers some really deep fundamental philosophical questions, like what are we and what are we not? So it'd be super intellectually stimulating, but I don't know that it's necessarily a good thing for the world. I'm much more feeling like the world is helped by using this technology to create tools for people and not using it to create people.
Is that we're always seeking more, right, as humans, but it seems that we do have chemical limits, right? Chemical limits to serotonin. We can see that in addicts, for example, however much they shoot themselves, like at some point they won't feel the same high and rush. Is that like our evolutionary limit? How much adrenaline or dopamine and serotonin we can feel.
Yeah, I think I see where you're going here. The idea is, well, maybe we should make artificial people because we can make them better than us because we've got all these weird constraints, these weird limitations that we don't that aren't in principle necessary. But then it's not us, right? Like, ah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I have children, so it's not like I'm against creating life, because I did some of that. But at the same time, I don't know. I don't know if we're ready. Like I think we're barely ready for the technology. I don't think we're actually ready for the technologies that we do have. Creating a technology like that where it really gets at fundamental questions of like, should we exist? Oh my gosh, I don't think we're ready for that.
Yeah, but isn't readiness like learning and also related to our biochemical system? Like, let's take AI, for example. Not sure about you, but when the chat GPT moment hit, I had some bouts of anxiety some people still have about, like, oh, there's so many new things, right? And they cannot adapt fast enough. But nowadays seems I'm a bit more chill about it. It's same when COVID hit, like when COVID hit, it was mayhem. We didn't know what to expect. But don't you think it's a function of adaptation and just learning and memorizing and reducing cortisol and increasing serotonin and just like being looking forward to what will happen?
I feel like what you just did. I don't know if it was intentional, but I'm gonna pretend it was intentional. I think
Probably not.
you jujitsu'd me. Like I started this conversation off saying that we can't really have intelligence if we don't have interaction. We don't have the ability to actually interact with the world and see the repercussions of our actions. And now I was arguing we don't want that. And you're like, but isn't it the case that we as a species are never going to learn to deal with it unless we actually deal with it? And I feel like, what? You flipped me over and now I'm on my back and I'm like, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I have to agree with you.
Yeah, that's evolution, I think, and that's also the beauty of us. It's like it's also the imperfection, right? And if we would create an artificial version of us, would we feel more fun, or would we even have new goals, right? It's very hard to think of alien goals and alien intelligence as a limited like hardware brain box. Doesn't that frustrate you sometimes? Don't you want to like step it up and be neural linked and have like more hypotheses running at the same time?
I can't say that I've ever wanted to be neural linked. I did get a brain scan because I thought, so I write with my right hand, but I write like a left-handed person. My hand hooks over. And so it turns out that that's often, it often correlates with people whose brains are lateralized backwards, where their language center is on the opposite side from other people. And I was like, yes, that definitely is me. I definitely have backwards brain. That would explain so much in my life if it just turns out I had a backwards brain. So they scanned my brain and it turns out I have just like a normal brain like everybody else. And so like I was highly disappointed, as you might imagine. But I don't know why I just went off into that story. What were we
I think
talking about?
divergence is great, but I feel because I'm that way too. I'm definitely weird, and I don't think that the same way as most of I found out since like 8 years old, right? Um, but I do think a lot of people nowadays they take that to excuse like the lack of hearts. If we take like Elon for example, do you still have faith in Elon? Like wild tangent right there, but what are your thoughts on what he's done as of late? Do you still think he's a torch bearer for AI and humanity?
I was always skeptical, and now I'm aggressively skeptical because I was in the federal government when his troops came and they occupied, my building, the building that I worked in, and started
Oh
to
yeah.
overturn the decisions that we worked very, very hard to make without really engaging with them, right? Like I'm definitely one of those people who believes that, no decision is perfect and you can always find a reason to dislike a decision. And if you want to debate it and kind of reweight things, you can get to a different place. But they weren't doing that. They were just saying, no, I'm pretty sure they canceled a grant at the NSF because it was focused on leaf and insect diversity. And they didn't like that word diversity because diversity is apparently bad. So yes, I didn't think to the extent that he's some kind of super genius, he did not apply any of that in this context. He was just shooting from the hip, and the things that he did were, I think, quite harmful. I guess in the fullness of time, we will try to assess whether or not it actually helped. But in the moment, it was absolutely the wrong decisions in absolutely the wrong way. And no, I don't respect that at all.
Yeah, same here. I had a friend here in Oaxaca that's wife got her job cut off as well, and she was making a substantial impact. I think for Elon, it was like payback time, right? Because government has not treated him the right way. And I mean, that's appreciable. You know, it's like, yeah, SpaceX was an underdog and it was torture for them just to survive, but doesn't mean that. You need to go payback time, especially a guy in his statute, in his position. Um, Last question for you, Michael, because I know your time is finite here. What's next for you? What are your top goals for this year?
Yeah, so I just started a new job here at Brown University where I am the associate provost for artificial intelligence. And like, I don't understand any of those words. Like, what's a provost? What happens when you make an associate provost? What is artificial intelligence again? So it's but the role that I've got here is to help coordinate AI efforts at the university level, how we're doing research in AI, how we're teaching about AI, how we're using AI in university operations, how we're deciding our AI policies, and how we're communicating about AI to the outside world. And all those things are really exciting and interesting to me. And I love that I've now been given a position where my job is to like find out what everybody on campus is doing and try to make sure that it makes sense. And it's going to be super fun. So again, this is day 1 of week 2 for me in this new role. I'm hoping that we get to engage in some really, really exciting, important stuff. And if we can get some AI installed on campus that just makes it easier to use the systems here and makes just life easier, I will be very, very happy.
Michael, thank you so much. That was Michael L. Littman and Charles Cormier for another